Welcome to the Crazy Might Work podcast, where we celebrate authors, entrepreneurs, innovators, inventors, and scientists who live at the very frontiers of human consciousness and possibility. We discuss their moments of breakthrough and analyze the strategies they use to enhance their own thinking and challenge conventional wisdom. Our guest today is a world-leading expert in creativity and co-author of a cracking book called Ideaflow. He's here to tell us what Ideaflow is and why it's the only business metric that matters. He's also director of executive education at Stanford's D.school and an adjunct professor at Stanford School of Engineering. Please join me in welcoming Jeremy Utley. Jeremy, welcome. Great to see you. And it would be fantastic if you could start just telling us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? Who do you credit or blame for who you've become? Just a little bit about your background and sort of early years.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you, Paul. Thanks for having me. And I'm delighted to get to have this conversation with you. I am actually a native of Oklahoma, a small state here in the United States. And I grew up in a preacher's home. My mom worked at the Estee Lauder counter at Dillard's, which was a department store. I don't know if you'd say latchkey kid or what the right phrase is, but I made a lot of dinners for myself growing up. My dad was at the church. My mom was at the mall. And as soon as I could, I got a job at a fast food restaurant. And that was my first kind of official employment, though I was kind of a church babysitter and lawnmower and all sorts of other things kind of unofficially. I worked at a fast food restaurant. Before I could drive, I rode with my mom to the mall where she would arrive at the mall before it opened to open her store. And I would have to wait for the fast food restaurant to open. And so I would sit and read. And I remember sitting actually in the mall food court, reading books from my summer reading list and wishing that I didn't have to go and serve, French fries and stuff because I just loved reading so much. And, but all jokes aside, my folks were both, they're strong proponents of education, of learning, of problem solving. And so we grew up in an atmosphere that really encouraged us to think independently, creatively. And I probably didn't really value creativity, actually, as it were, until graduate school when I was working at a startup in India that was leveraging this radical new methodology called design thinking to solve problems of poverty. And that was the first time that I'd ever thought that creativity might have market value. I knew there was value just personally. I loved poetry and things like that. But I didn't really know that there was market value until I encountered design thinking when I was in business school at Stanford.
I think design thinking was kind of an aha moment for many, right? That idea that that kind of creativity could have a place in business. And is it still very strong, Jeremy, in the work that you're doing at Stanford and elsewhere? I mean, do you still see that design thinking creates value and delivers on that creativity promise?
Absolutely. I mean, we exist at Stanford to really stimulate the creative confidence of the students who've been entrusted to our care, and we're dealing with a lot of highly analytical, very kind of rational, reasonable students who are pursuing degrees in medicine or law or business or engineering. And for many of them, there's this false duality, right? That, creativity is something other than what I do. And yet what we say is we want policymakers to be creative in their construction of policy. We want hospital administrators to be creative in designing the best patient experiences. We want engineers to be creative in devising novel solutions to our, physical challenges. So in every area we want there to be this kind of creative fluency, if you will. And yet most of the students who come to the D.school as graduate students at Stanford, they maybe because a well-meaning teacher told them that they couldn't draw a walrus or something when they were in second grade, they had come under this notion that they aren't creative. And perhaps it's because creativity is very much associated with the arts, but it's kept people from really tapping into their creative potential and seeing that capacity is something that they can develop every bit as much as they can develop their analytical capability.
So Jeremy, it's a bit of water under the bridge, since that first kind of foray into design thinking with that startup that you mentioned. So you've been in creativity in some way, shape, or form for a couple of decades now.
Yeah.
So I think for many of our listeners, there would still be a pretty foreign concept, this idea that you could be 100% involved in creativity in business. Maybe you could just talk us through a day in the life for you. What does that look like? Because I know you've got academic as well as sort of business interests. So what does that? Talk us through that.
A day in the life. Let's see. Let's just pull up my calendar today. Why not? That'll be fun. So today I had I started with a meeting with one of my venture partners. I'm involved in a venture fund, and we've made an investment in a financial services company. And so we were talking about the progress that company is making and how to help them attract new customers. That was the first thing. Then I had a meeting with a French university, actually, about a research study we're leading. Myself and a colleague from Harvard are leading in exploring the impact of generative AI on collaboration and problem solving. And then I had a call with a designer who's a former Nike Air Jordan designer, amazing Black leader who is looking into unconventional career transitions, and talked to him about joining my podcast, actually, which was quite fun. Then I had a call with a woman who's written a great book, which his name is escaping me at the moment, but about spirituality and unlocking kind of energy and genius through spirituality. And then I had a call with a sound bath vendor who some collaborators in our ecosystem have leveraged to much effect in terms of helping silence the inner critic. They use a sound bath as kind of a way to get somebody away from the inner critic. So I actually immersed myself in one of their experiences to evaluate them as a vendor for our programs. Then I tried to frantically do a bunch of email, as you might imagine, and did a quick workout. I always do like a high intensity interval kind of workout. I did a quick workout, made myself a protein shake. Then I had another call with another generative AI partner that's looking to, I've got a second generative AI study that's really focused on studying how enterprises identify opportunities to apply generative AI to their business processes. And so I talked with a team at a multinational beverage company that's looking to kind of establish their kind of thought leadership in this space. And that brings us to 2:00. And then I built some assets for the podcast. I've got a couple of interviews coming up that I need to build. And now I'm working on my blog and newsletter. I send out my newsletter on Tuesday mornings. And so I was just trying to write a couple of blog posts. I didn't quite get them finished before the podcast, which I was hoping that I would. So whenever we finish, I'll have to kind of tidy that up. And then that newsletter goes out to about 12,000 or so people. And some people actually look forward to it. So I have a fiduciary duty to send my newsletter to my people. Anyway, that's just today. I didn't actually, now that I read through it, it's like, wow, a lot happened today. I thought today was kind of a mild day, to be honest with you. So.
Yeah, well, thanks for making the time to do this with us at the end of all that. Hopefully it'll be chilling, not stressing in the conversation.
No, it's a lot of fun.
But I'd love to talk a little about your book. So you recently published a book called Ideaflow, which is a really great read. What prompted you to do that, given this incredibly busy schedule that you have already? I'm sure there wasn't spared time that you were trying to fill. So what's the central idea behind that, and why do you think it was worth writing about?
When you're sharing this material with audiences kind of all the world over and over and over and over again, my writing partner and colleague Perry Claiborne and I have conducted kind of capacity building ventures all over the world over the last 15 years or so, in Australia, your homeland, in Israel and Russia and Malaysia and Japan and Colombia, Hong Kong, Cleveland, Ohio, you name it. We've been all over the world, and we've always tried to emphasize certain key principles. We've taught online courses that have reached millions of students. And one of the things that, a lot of things really resonate with people. For example, empathize with your users, right? Talk to the people you're designing for. Everybody goes, yeah, we should do that. Separate idea generation from idea evaluation. Everybody goes, oh yeah, we should do that. Experiment more quickly and more cheaply. People go, yeah, we should do that, definitely. But then there was this one slide that we would show, and it shocked people. And the slide was based on a Linus Pauling quote. Linus Pauling, who's the only individual to win the Nobel Prize twice. As an aside, he almost won it a third time because he was neck and neck with Watson and Crick in discovering the double helix structure of DNA. And had he done so, he would have won a third Nobel Prize, almost certainly. But anyway, there's a quote. Someone asked him once, Dr. Pauling, how do you have so many good ideas? And he said something very kind of simple. He said, to have a good idea, you need to have a lot of ideas. And our question, which we ask all the world over, is how many's a lot? Define a lot. If you take as Linus Pauling's, statement at face value, that to have a good idea, you need to have a lot of ideas, or literally, as I was just writing on my newsletter, I'll pull it up right now because I was, no kidding, just writing this article a moment ago. If I can find it, let me see if I can get it. Yeah, I was writing this Isaac Asimov quote. He said, for every new good idea you have, there are 10,000 foolish ones, which you naturally do not care to display. Right. So, Kevin Kelly, who I had on my podcast recently, said a multitude of bad ideas is required for a good idea. But anyway, what's the number? How many's a lot? And luckily at Stanford, there's research on this question. And it turns out that to get a commercially successful new product or service, you need about 2,000 ideas. And that number always shocks people. The same people who know, we should empathize with our end customer, and we should separate idea generation from idea evaluation. And we should probably prototype and test more rapidly and more cheaply. Those same people, when we say, how how many ideas you need? They say 20. We go, no, more. And they go, 40? And we say, a lot more. And they say 200. And we go, another order of magnitude. And people go, 2,000 ideas? And so anyway, we saw this time and time again, that we would emphasize the number of ideas that are required to really get to a breakthrough. And we realized people routinely underestimate how many ideas they need. And so we became aware that ultimately it's actually a volume game. What teams and individuals need to be orienting to is a much higher volume of potential solutions. And if we can get people to kind of shift the goalpost, so to speak, then a lot of the other, like, how do we get more ideas? Well, you should talk to customers. How do you get more ideas? Well, you should separate idea generation from idea evaluation. How do you get more ideas? Well, you should, experiment more cheaply and more quickly, right? And on and on and on. And so it became kind of a thread that ended up pulling a lot of our content together.
So Matt, I was just, as you were saying that, I was just reflecting on I guess the level of understanding that is required in an organization to expend that effort in gathering and generating ideas. And in your book, you mention a few elderly organizations. So you talk about Procter and Gamble, Nintendo, Siemens. There's been some of those that have been around for a long period of time. Presumably in that existence, they've had to reinvent themselves as businesses a few times. We know they have. Some of them have these enormous product ranges. But just thinking about what does it take socially, or culturally within an organization to actually have that, I guess, level of patience or expectation that that number of ideas is required. Do you see that anywhere? Do you see organizations that do that?
Well, yes, absolutely. You look at Saturday Night Live, for example. That's a great example. Saturday Night Live knows that to have a viral clip, they've got to put out a ton of mediocre content. How many times do you turn off the television because Saturday, I mean, maybe not in Australia, it's earlier there, right? But here it's like past midnight when Saturday Night Live is on. And there are many nights where I'll sit here and say, it's not worth it. This is a waste of time, right? Well, there are probably more, this isn't to disparage SNL, by the way, it's actually to extol them, but there are probably as many nights that I turn it off because it's no good as I'm just doubled over in laughter, right? Taco Bell is another great example. The head of the Taco Bell food lab said that when they were making their breakthrough product called the Doritos Locos Taco, she tried over 2,000 different variations of taco shell. Okay, 2,000 just of that single taco shell, right? And the point is that firms that are innovative understand they need to be generating a volume of ideas. You look at Netflix, they generate an enormous volume of ideas. You look at Amazon, they generate an enormous volume of ideas. And the challenge is most people's individual cognitive bias, and that's important because organizations are just collections of individuals, which is collections of minds. Most individuals' cognitive bias is to settle on a seemingly good solution as quickly as possible. It's called satisficing, or it's called elsewhere in the literature, it's called the Einstilling effect. But it turns out that one of the most profound kind of human tendencies is the tendency to fixate on an early solution to the neglect of others, despite the fact that there's no indication whatsoever that suggests that the timing of a solution is in any way related to the quality of the solution. It turns out timing and quality have nothing to do with one another. And you're just as likely to come up with a brilliant idea later as you are earlier. But most people don't wait for the brilliant idea. They settle for the good enough. And there are some problems for which the good enough solution is good, in which case your heuristics and your shortcuts pay off. There are many problems, on the other hand, that a good enough solution, or, as we see in our work, the quick fix isn't really that quick and it's not really a fix. You go, well, why is that? Well, it's because you have this cognitive bias to just settle on the first seemingly plausible solution. And so if you can get people to be aware that there are these biases that actually plague them and that keep them from breaking through more often, then you can start to explore, well, how do you do really great work? One of my favorite quotes is Amos Tversky, who's the Nobel Prize winning partner to Danny Kahneman. Kahneman won the Nobel. Tversky had sadly passed away. But someone asked him, they rewrote the laws of economic theory. And someone asked them, how do you have so many amazing research angles and hypotheses to test? And Amos Tversky famously said, the secret to doing good research is to always be a little underemployed. You waste years by not being able to waste hours. And very few people have the stomach for or the tolerance for wasting time, as it seems.
Yeah. So just reflecting on that for a second then, Jeremy, what are the kinds of rituals or habits do you see in prolific innovators? So this is maybe more at an individual level. I mean, how do you see them wasting time or whatever that form that takes?
Well, one of the simplest ways to waste time is to make time. It's not to be, obvious, but if there's no time on your calendar for solving problems or for generating novel solutions or running experiments, you're not going to solve problems or generate novel solutions or run experiments. And somebody's going back to back to back between Zoom meetings. One thing I can guarantee you is they're not innovating, for sure not. It's not something that can be relegated to the margins. So that's one thing, is making time to innovate, period, full stop, right? And the way I picture it is almost like Tetris. We're just fielding inquiries and then we're finding ways to fit them in. As long as we're treating calendar events like Tetris blocks that need to get arranged, we're toast, right? So that's one thing. Another kind of core, behavioral trait of innovation-oriented individuals is they're always seeking fresh input. It turns out that our thinking is inspired by the inputs that we consume. And so innovators have this habit of reading outside their field, for example. Meeting with people from outside their field. I was just reading a book by Brian Grazer, the Academy Award-winning producer. He has what he calls curiosity conversations, where once a week he tries to have a conversation with somebody from another field. By the way, his calendar guaranteed is more busy than yours or mine, for sure. And yet he still makes time. My famous example is Ben Franklin, who once per week for 30 years, he met with a group called his Junto, which is a group of leather, apron workers who were artisans who were in other organizations, and they would meet and discuss important questions of the day. Has there been a scientific advance that has bearing on our businesses? Has anyone moved to Philadelphia who we ought to know? Has anyone's business fallen into disrepute, and for what reason? They would ask these questions, and it was a way of seeking new information. You look at somebody like Franklin and say, wow, the bifocal, the Continental Congress, the lightning rod, the fire department, it starts to make sense. This is a person who is very thoughtful about curating inputs. And that's one of the habits that we see innovative people undertake is they're obsessive about the inputs to their thinking. And what we have kind of come to say at Stanford is inspiration is a discipline. Inspiration is the disciplined pursuit of unexpected inputs. And those who are trying to find new cognitive inputs to stimulate new thinking are thoughtful and structured about how they seek inspiration.
I can see you've got an invite to the Leather Apron Club there, based on your background.
You got it. You know it. Yeah, I'm a part of a Junto, a group of CEOs who want to be committed to exploration and innovation, and we got leather aprons as kind of a testament to our shared commitment to making space for innovative conversations.
Excellent. You mentioned another kind of discipline that has something to teach us around innovation in the form of jazz and jazz improv specifically in the book. What's the connection there, Jeremy?
Well, one of the kind of landmark studies of creativity is conducted by a guy named Dr. Charles Lim, who's at MIT, and he basically studied fMRI scans of both jazz musicians and, interestingly, freestyle hip hop artists. And what he found is he put them under fMRI scans and he traced their blood flow through their brain. It's not actually in the creative moment. It's not that there's more blood flow. It's that there's less. And if you look at the regions where there's less blood flow, it turns out there are regions that are responsible for judgment and criticism. And what Dr. Lim found is that creative individuals are basically turning off their sensor. And it's not that they have more creative ideas. It's actually that they let themselves have less creative ideas. As Taylor Swift once said, the great sociologist Taylor Swift, she said, I want young people to know that the hundreds or thousands of dumb ideas I've had have led me to my good ideas. And that's very true. It's a counterintuitive reality that in order to generate good ideas, you have to allow yourself to be bad, and you have to reduce your filter. You have to reduce your censorship. And it's especially in the context of organizations, it's a very a difficult proposition to think about. Wait, I've got to share bad ideas. Yeah. If you don't, you're not going to share good ideas.
And I guess, related to that is this whole idea of maintaining rigor around what are the ideas that come in and go out, and which are the good ones, bad ones. You in the book say the faintest ink is better than the sharpest memory. And you also allude to the fact that within D.school, if something's not documented, it didn't happen. So it seems that related to this, there's kind of a discipline around just documentation of ideas and capturing of those, even prior to evaluation. Where do you see the best of that happening? Do you do it? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, the faintest ink is better than the sharpest mind is the perfect quote. I think that one of the key behaviors of an innovator, it starts, there's so many, right? That, as you said, it's hard to even remember them all. But one of the things that great innovators do is they carry a notebook. Jeff Bezos even was noted at D.E. Shaw whenever he was a fledgling hedge fund manager. His coworkers said that he'd be writing down ideas so fast it's as if he was afraid they were going to fly away. And, Victor Hugo's son said they couldn't eat a family meal together without Hugo picking up his pen and writing some, kind of bit of conversation down. That this tendency of innovators to document what's happening around them. Anne Lamott says she always keeps a note card in her back pocket, just in case, just a single note card, right? My mentor, David Kelly, was good friends with the late comedian Robin Williams. And he said that Robin always carried a yellow legal pad, always. And he would always be writing down bits of conversation, and they would end up in the bits that night at the comedy club. Writing ideas down is kind of the fundamental behavior of the innovator. And yet many people don't do it, but yet if you talk to innovative individuals and creative individuals, they all have some kind of system.
Mm. And would you choose, personally, would you choose physically writing as opposed to typing ideas into a device? What would you?
I think whatever is at your fingertips. For a long time, I was very prescriptive about carrying a notebook until I forgot my notebook one day. And then I had to start a new notes kind of, app because I was on a trip. So, and I've become less prescriptive over time. I really value notebooks. I mean, I've got notebooks here that I write ideas down. It's embarrassing the number of Post-its are on my desk. However, text messaging yourself is perfectly legitimate. Starting a note in your notes app is perfectly legitimate. Whatever it takes to capture the idea. And I send myself emails sometimes and snooze them so they come back later. The point is that you have the perfect system so much as that you have an instinct to capture. And I find, especially when it comes to sleep, I get lazy. And some of my best ideas happen when I'm unguarded and when I'm kind of, on my way drifting towards sleep. And what I have found is that commitment to myself to, if an idea comes, no matter how inconvenient it is, I'm going to write it down. It's a personal practice that you have to enforce on yourself.
Yeah. I guess sometimes you get up in the morning and go, who is this guy?
Right.
That wrote that.
Yeah. Well, I had an experience the other day. This was very instructive to me. I had gone to bed kind of noodling on this problem that we were working on. And right as I was falling asleep, I thought of a solution, a very cool solution. And then I'm having this kind of existential, wrestling match with myself. Do I get up and write it down? Do I just lay here? I'm going to remember it in the morning. Maybe I'll just, chant it to myself a few times, right? Kind of all this stuff. And then I decided, no, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I'm going to do it. I'm going to write it down. So I kind of stir myself awake. I reach for a pen and I actually write it down in a notebook. And then I fall asleep, somewhat frustrated that I lost 5 minutes of sleep because I, went through this. Well, in the morning, I woke up and the first thing I thought of was my solution. The next thing I thought of was frustration that I had wasted 5 minutes unnecessarily, clearly writing down the solution. And then I picked up the notepad to throw away the note when I realized the solution that I had written down last night was totally different than the one I remembered in the morning. And had I not actually written down the solution that I thought of the night before, I would have sworn to you that the solution I woke up with was the one that I thought of laying down.
Interesting. Yeah, I think we sort of overestimate our infallibility when it comes to memory, don't we?
Totally.
Yeah. So Jeremy, we've been talking a little bit about sort of the personal side of innovation, a bit about the organizational, cultural piece. I would imagine that for many, when we talk about idea generation, that their minds go straight to brainstorming. And one of the things that you suggest in the book is that brainstorming is in many times and contexts overrated. Is it something that's done its dash, or is there still a role for brainstorming? And if so, what does the advanced version of that look like?
Well, there's a role for sure, but insofar as brainstorming is meant coming together with others to consider a problem. There's a critical role for brainstorming. The point is, very few people know how to do it well. And so you get these kind of rolled eyes. I'm sure even when they heard the word brainstorm on this episode, they're like, oh boy, if we get the brainstorm invitation on our inbox, we're looking for, is our kid sick at school? Should we go pick them up? We're just looking for any excuse, right? And so that to me is sufficient evidence that the way we typically approach that problem is broken. But that being said, there's immense value in bringing people together for mutual consideration and for collective consideration. The question is, how do you do it? And in our book, we advocate what we call an innovation sandwich, which is very simply a sequence of activities. Because a brainstorm often is considered this single event where everything happens in the event. And what we do is almost just like a deconstructed sandwich, if you will. It's actually break up the pieces of the event. Share the prompt or the question ahead of time with people and ask them to consider it ahead of time. In fact, ask them to bring 2 or 3 ideas to the meeting, right? And so that kind of separates the extroverted moment from an introverted consideration, which they tend to be better if they aren't at the same time. So you have everybody come, having already considered the problem and having a few solutions. Now, the danger to be aware of here is that people can anchor on certain ideas. But if you can protect against that danger, it's almost always better for people to have thought about the problem first. So you get people to think about the problem first. You get people to come prepared. And then what you want to do is you want to facilitate a sharing exercise where we aren't making decisions, but we are sparking one another and provoking one another to think of or to imagine possibilities inspired by one another's individual considerations. And so in this stage, you're not looking to make decisions. You're not looking to evaluate, but instead you're looking to generate and to take each of the ideas that have arrived in the early part almost as seeds and then see what kind of plant you can get it to grow into. And so there's some rules of engagement there that we can go into in a little bit, but the basic idea is you want to create a safe space for people to build on one another's ideas. And then, so that's kind of the second thing. The next thing, and this is critical, is don't decide. Ordinarily, we almost always in the brainstorm meeting would say, okay, well, what should we do? We've generated one idea, or by the way, the research suggests 2. Most corporate brainstorms generate 2 ideas, but suppose you do better, 10 or 20 or 2,000. Do you select it now? What we advocate is instead of selecting, it's put that decision off. Select in the next meeting. And what you say is, hey, we've come up with some great stuff in this last hour or 30 minutes or whatever it is. It's our understanding of the, site research at Stanford or whatever you want, right? But it's our understanding of the underlying neuroscience that some of the best ideas that are going to, occur to us as a group have yet to occur to us. They're actually going to come after this conversation because we've all just exposed ourselves to a bunch of new inputs. And wow, wouldn't it be great if we left here imagining perhaps there are even better ideas that have yet to be born? And what happens is that actually ends up triggering what's called kind of, working memory into processing in the background. And it only works. You only trigger working memory if you don't declare something as finished. If you declare it as finished, then, the brain's a very effective kind of, just sweep it into the dustbin. But if you say we haven't decided yet, you actually trigger a much better way, kind of better thinking in the intervening time. And so then when you come back together in, say, a week, you certainly can review all the ideas that you came up with in the last meeting, but then you can also create space and time to share the better ideas that have occurred to the group between then and now, and then evaluate them together. And then the last thing I'd say is use specific selection criteria. Don't just choose the thing that's easy to do, the implementable idea, but instead be thoughtful about the criteria by which we are selecting and seeking to preserve the innovation potential that we've created through the bread, meat, and cheese portion of the sandwich.
I love that idea of using brainstorming as an input rather than an output / finalization of a creative process. And also just allowing that incubation time, between sessions for other ideas to emerge. So Jeremy, once you've got your selection criteria identified and you've made that a initial choice, you talk about scrappy experimentation and testing. What does that imply?
Well, the basic gist is it's almost impossible a priori to know the merits of a new idea. So how do you know which one is worth implementing? Or as a simple example, most people, if they have an idea, the next question is, how do I know if this is a good idea? And for us, experimentation is the way you learn whether you have a good idea. Specifically, not can you build it, but should you build it? Would people want you to build it? And so instead of going into kind of feasibility studies, as many engineering cultures are prone to do, instead of doing that, what we advocate is going into desirability studies, where you create believable decision points for human beings to give you credible information about whether you should invest time or resources in this direction. And so what we call that is scrappy experiments. And what you're trying to do is generate not big data, but little data, so to speak, that's highly believable and actionable data.
So that's fundamentally around desirability, and I'm imagining that's primarily customer orientated, or whoever that beneficiary.
Right. Yeah. You want to try to find ways to create what is a believable decision moment for that person. So if you're trying to see whether, as my friend Erica Walsh of Bridgestone was, whether it's desirable for a Uber driver to roll onto a mat that instantaneously measures their tread wear, well, the really hard thing is, can we instantaneously measure tread wear? Okay. So don't start with that problem. And the engineers want to start with that problem, right? Oh, is it 7 decimal places? Is it 9? But instead what we say is, well, hang on. Would an Uber driver want you to measure their tread wear? Well, how can we answer that? What if we put up a sign at the entrance to the parking garage saying, park in this parking space to get your tread wear measured? Does anyone show up? You go, well, but we don't know if we can do that. Well, you can't take out a ruler and measure their tread wear. The question is whether they pull into the parking spot, right? And so but that just requires a little bit of thoughtfulness about, okay, what's the outcome variable that we're seeking to measure? Is it that people sign up for the service? Great. Then the thing that we should figure out is, how do we make it believable that the service is available or it's something they could sign up for? And that's just that for a lot of teams is a radical shift in orientation from, technological feasibility to human desirability.
So we've spoken a little about this discipline of capturing ideas, and we're saying that's something that's pretty universal in that sort of serial innovator space. What about curiosity, Jeremy? You define that as a way of getting people to observe more closely, think more deeply, and imagine more vigorously. So almost poetic the way that's described, but how do you stoke that in practice? I mean, is it innate, or are there ways or environments where that is more prolific?
Well, I would say one thing that you should do is pay attention to what you pay attention to, and that's a really good indicator of interest, curiosity. It's really difficult to summon the subconscious into solving a problem that you don't care anything about. And so finding ways to, what are these signals that there's real care here? And one of the ways that we seek to engender care at the design school is we advocate human-centered design, where we're in close proximity to the people that we're designing for and whose lives we're trying to improve or to impact in some way. And what we find is that the innovators are the ones they've developed such a care for an individual or such a passion to solve a problem that the resistance and the obstacles that are almost inevitable in the way of doing anything new they don't deter them from continuing to make progress. And so what you want to do is seek to grow in that sense of care. Curiosity is a hard thing to define and it's a hard thing to cultivate. I find that care is a little bit more easy. Do you care about this? And if you don't know what you care about, then what I would recommend is an assignment that we've been giving at Stanford since the 1960s that we call it Keep a Bug List. Write down a list of the things that bug you. This isn't about computer,
Yeah.
code and errors and lines, not debugging anything. It's about saying, what annoys me? And a lot of times that is a great source, a treasure trove of information about where you might want to consider solving a new problem.
You spoke a little earlier about shutting down that internal critic and the ability in that MRI study that you mentioned of individuals to do that. So the ability to observe that through that study, that limb study. In your book, you also mention, and this is probably more at the social collective level, but dare to suck meetings, taboo days, unideas, some of these really engaging concepts. But what do you do in your practice that kind of liberates that free thinking?
One of I think one of the things that I've come to really admire is a willingness to have bad ideas. And so whatever engenders bad ideas is really great. It could be just in the spirit of having a stupid idea, actually saying that in the spirit of sharing stupid ideas, and then say something stupid. Steve Jobs, actually, when he was collaborating with Sir Johnny Ive, Sir Johnny Ive gave a talk at his memorial service. And one thing that he said was, Steve used to say this a lot. He'd say, "Hey, Johnny, you want to hear a dopey idea?" And he said most of the time his ideas were pretty dopey. In fact, sometimes they were truly terrible, but every once in a while they were wonderful. And having that habit of sharing a dopey idea is really, really important. And in a team, what I've observed in teams that I feel are high performing, high functioning, what I've observed is that when an individual, especially someone who is a star, when they say, "Hey, here's a dumb idea," it really changes the tone of the meeting. Why are they? Because the first thought is, why are they sharing a dumb idea? And then the second thought is, we can share dumb ideas here. And the third thought is, oh, it's not that dumb. Actually, I can make it great. Well, ta-da. It's like, that's what we're trying to do, right? Yeah. And so by prefacing a statement with, here's a dumb idea, a lot of times you're actually setting so much really wonderful culture there. Just simple. I mean, one of my favorite kind of litmus tests for leaders is to ask yourself, when's the last time somebody shared a stupid idea with me? And for most leaders, they have one of two answers. One is, you know what, Jeremy, honestly, it's been a while. In which case I'd say, thank you for your honesty. You have work to do, right? Another answer is, Jeremy, all the time. People are always sharing stupid ideas with me. In which case I would say, you're a jerk. And I wasn't asking you whether you thought their ideas were stupid. I was asking you whether they think their ideas are stupid, right? There's a world of difference between the two. And a leader who always thinks everybody else's ideas are stupid is a jerk. But a leader who's engendering this kind of environment where people go, hey, here's a dumb idea, ends up being a really inspiring leader with a kind of a robust creative practice on their team.
You're in a pretty special part of the world. One of the stories that you share in the book is the William Shockley, the kind of development of Silicon Valley, creating that, I guess, broader social environment outside of the organization, even where those creative collisions can occur. What's been your experience of moving to Silicon Valley and just what that environment does for creativity and innovation?
Well, I would say there's definitely, it kind of makes thinking about new ideas normal is probably the easiest way to say it, that it's very common for people to be, there's like a little bit of dissatisfaction, with the status quo. So, what's wrong with that thing? We could do better there. And it can be annoying at times, but it's also, there's like this creative tension that's kind of constantly humming. I didn't know much about entrepreneurship prior to moving to California. It wasn't, there are entrepreneurs. I grew up in Texas. There are entrepreneurs there, certainly. But for whatever reason, it wasn't and maybe it's just the circles that I ran in. It didn't seem like that was a viable path, or that was a path for somebody like me. But then living in California and interacting with technologists and founders and entrepreneurs and people who are trying to solve problems, you start to become aware of problems that you care about and ideas that you have and ways that you could address them, et cetera, et cetera.
Thanks, Jeremy. So just kind of just closing the loop a little bit, maybe coming back to something a bit more personal to close off our conversation this afternoon. What would be your personal kind of go-to practice when it comes to innovating? When you've got something that you need to solve or think innovatively about, what would you do?
Yeah, it's kind of a derivative of something that we do in the book. We talk about an idea quota. For me, a derivative of that is what I call try 10. It's just like a little software chatbot. We can drop it in the show notes if you want. But it's just a little software chatbot that I've created mostly for myself, but for anybody else who's like me, who just needs help getting outside of their own head. And it's just a series of kind of analogies to kind of bombard you to think in different directions. For me, we actually had this experience the other day. We live in a house that was built in 1908. So which means a lot of the interiors, 115 years old. And the other day, one of our daughters slammed a door and shattered a 115-year-old window. And you go, okay, well, what do we do about that besides, try to clean up the broken glass? And what I said to my wife, and I'm a total nerd, but I said, Michelle, we should do an idea quota. And she said, what? I said, how are we going to respond to this? We should do an idea quota, right? Which is an instinct that we've taught ourselves to develop, which is when you're trying to come up with a solution, come up with 10. Don't just come up with one. But even for me, it's hard to just say, okay, now come up with 10 solutions on the spot. And so I built this try 10 software to just enable myself to kind of get out of my own head. And so that's probably my go-to solution.
If you could have dinner with any person alive or dead and ask them one question, who and what?
Any person alive or dead. I think Da Vinci would be pretty cool. And what I would ask him is, can I borrow one of your notebooks?
I hope your Italian's up to scratch, Jeremy. But and then just one, a bunch of our listeners are I guess, early career scientists, PhDs that are thinking about, how do they make a career of breakthrough? How do you actually have enough kind of good ideas that you end up making a difference over that career that's ahead of you? One parting bit of advice that you would give to that group?
I think one thing what I found myself saying to folks often recently is start with what you have and where you are. It's really easy to think you've got to make a wholesale reinvention or a wholesale renewal but a good question to ask is, what are the assets that I have available to me? Maybe that I haven't identified as assets in terms of relationships or knowledge of technologies or connections or knowledge of problems, that aren't being solved well. A lot of times, like one of our best assets is just an awareness of problems that need to be solved. That's a great asset. And so for me, it's take stock of where you are and the assets that you have at your disposal in shaping the path forward.
Thanks, Jeremy. I think that's great advice, and I guess puts you in a space of energy and enthusiasm that you can actually work with. So I love that.
Well, if I may, it's empowering. If you think about what can I start, it's like, it's overwhelming, right? But when you say, well, what do you have? I was talking to a friend who's got a construction business, and he doesn't know if he wants to do that. And I said, you have so many contractors in your network. You have so many people you can call on a moment's notice, and they'll show up on a job site. What can you do with that? That's kind of I don't have that. If quick, make a roof, I'd be like, I don't know what to do, right? But he's got he's got guys, he's got suppliers, right? Well, what can I do with these suppliers and these contractors? And so it's useful to take stock of those things and say, what can I do with this? Many times the answer, it's not nothing.
For sure. If you can get a tradesperson in Australia, you've got some magical powers. That's for sure. But Jeremy, I just wanted to say thank you so much, for your extreme generosity, making this time to chat this through with us. Both you and the book Ideaflow are absolute wealth of really contemporary thinking and bringing that all together in a way that's super accessible. So. I'm hoping that a lot of our listeners will go off and get the book off Amazon or wherever their preferred chat platform is. And thank you very much again. We look forward to the next book, which I hope is already underway. But thanks again, Jeremy, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Likewise, thanks for having me, Paul. Cheers.